After that, David came to a stretch of wilderness. Between the mountains and the lake, an elderly woman was sketching, but she couldn't find any inspiration. When she looked up, she saw David. She complimented him on his beautiful face and asked if he would model for her. At the invitation of the elderly woman, Sophie, David sat down and became the subject of her drawing to show her thanks. Sophie originally wanted to invite David to her home for lunch, but her home was in Switzerland, just across the border. David laughed when he heard that. He said he was heading to Denmark, and Switzerland happened to be the next stop. So he took a ride in Sophie's car along the way. When they reached the border, the soldiers began checking documents one by one. David immediately became nervous and whispered that he didn't have any papers and wanted to get out of the car. Sophie softly reassured him, saying the inspection here wasn't very strict. But David still looked uneasy. Sophie explained to the soldier that David was her grandson, that they had left in a hurry, and he had forgotten his documents. David forced a slightly stiff smile to go along with it. Just like that, they passed the inspection without trouble. When they arrived at Sophie's home, the walls were covered with her paintings. She even hung up the portrait of David that she had just finished that day. Sophie painted in an impressionist style. She didn't paint appearances, but the feeling she had about a person in the painting. David looked quiet and intelligent, but there was a hint of sadness in his eyes. That was her first impression of him. Sophie prepared a generous meal for David. She wore a small locket on her chest with a photo of a boy inside. It was her child, who had died of pneumonia many years ago. This was the first time someone had been willing to openly share their past with David. When Sophie asked where he lived, David looked at the painting on the wall and blurted out that he had no home. He quickly corrected himself, saying he lived with a circus. Sophie didn't press him and didn't question his story. She simply told David that if he had nowhere to stay for the night, he could stay here. But David didn't dare to stay too long. Sophie truly wanted to help him. David suddenly broke down in tears and begged her not to send him back. Sophie asked in confusion where she would be sending him back to. David answered, to them, or to anyone at all. Sophie told him firmly that she would not hand him over to anyone. Here, he was safe. At that moment, David finally let his guard down and threw himself into Sophie's arms. Throughout his constant escape, Sophie was the only one who helped him without asking why. That night, David slept without nightmares for the first time. The next day, David went out with Sophie inside a church. A military officer walked in behind him. David instinctively became tense, but this time, he didn't turn and run, because Sophie had told him that if you trust no one, life has no meaning. David took a deep breath, lifted his head, and greeted the officer on his own initiative. The seriousness on the officer's face disappeared, and he responded with a gentle smile. At that moment, the memory of the bar of soap became clear in David's mind. Back then, because he cared about cleanliness, he had secretly taken the officer's soap. When the theft was discovered, everyone was gathered together to find the culprit. The officer noticed the soap in David's hands. Another soldier suggested that David be punished in public to keep David alive. John exchanged a look with the officer. Then, John took the soap and took full responsibility for it himself, powerless. The officer finally pulled the trigger. Later, the plan to escape from the camp to Denmark was secretly arranged by that same officer, because he was about to be transferred and would no longer be able to protect David. Fear and guilt slowly blurred this memory in David's mind.